Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing Almond by Sohn Won-Pyung, and I give this book a 5 out of 5. My Booktuber shoutout today I actually found on Goodreads when I was reading the reviews for Almond. Her name on Booktube is Sassy Library Fox, which I'll link down below, and she just recently hit 300 subscribers, so congrats. And if you want to check her channel, again, it's down below. And as always, before I go into my full review, I would appreciate if you hit the subscribe button. If you read this book, I'd love to hear your commentary down below. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Almond is a debut novel by Sohn Won-Pyung, and it was published in 2020. And the genre I would put it in is fiction, and specifically I would call it like slice of life. Sohn Won-Pyung is Korean, and she is born in Korea. She is now in her mid-40s. She was a film director, screenwriter, and novelist, currently living in South Korea where she was born, and her bachelor's was in social studies and philosophy. However, she later also studied film directing. She started her career more in film, and then eventually she got into writing. I mentioned earlier that Almond is her debut novel, and how it came about was when she had her first baby, she had more time to write here and there, and the acknowledgements in the book, so at the very end, if you want to read it. I normally don't really read it because I find it's a lot of like just thank yous and acknowledgements, but sometimes I find authors will have the first part a nice interesting blurb of how they came about to their story. So Won-Pyung talks about how when she had her new baby, she would look at her baby and there'd be moments where she'd just be overwhelmed with emotion and feel really emotional or get very tearful for no reason at all except that she saw her baby. So she started having discussion with herself about being a parent and how being a parent, the love is endless and limitless, and how like if your kid's bad or good, you're gonna love it no matter what. And like where is that line really drawn? So that's how she started to write the story of Almond. Before I get into the story and the characters, I want to share about a mental condition that the book kind of is, I guess, like centered around, which is alexithymia, which is basically the inability to feel and express emotions, and also the inability to identify and understand emotions. So the main character YoonJ suffers from this condition, which is diagnosed at a young age, and basically why this condition exists is because you have the amygdala, which is shaped like an almond in your brain and also about the size of an almond, and for people, depending how it develops in your brain, it could be really stunted in growth or to grow bigger in time. And it is a mental condition because there is the ability to work on it, and with recognition and training and pattern, your amygdala can actually expand, and it's also a spectrum. So I actually found out after while reading about it that 1 in 10 people actually have it. The character in this book obviously has a very extreme case of it. So when you read this book, I do want to clarify that if you know someone that has this condition, he or she won't be like the character in this book necessarily, but from my understanding, it's kind of like a spectrum. So some people may have a hard time understanding, but over time can't understand someone. And I also think when it comes to emotions, it's so it's such a big cultural thing. So different cultures can also suffer from this as well when they when they interact with each other. So I just wanted to explain more about the condition alexithymia before I get into the premise and the characters. The first character in me is YoonJ. So he is super young when we first meet him. He's 6 years old, and he encounters a situation through his childhood where kids around him get hurt, and he is slow to react or slow to empathize to check that they're okay because he doesn't really understand with alexithymia that something is wrong. So he has a hard time growing up, and then his mom really cares that she wants her child to have a normal life, so she will write like prompts on papers around their apartment and do a lot of like conversations to be like, oh, if someone bumps into you, you should say sorry. It's also always good to say thank you, and there's common reactions to say, hey, why did you do that? So YoonJ, we see, is very eager to learn. He doesn't really get how so many situations happen in reality. So it's really interesting to get into his head and see how he interprets different things. He lives with his mother and grandmother. His dad is not in the picture. And one day on Christmas Eve, I believe, his mother, and grandma go out for dinner and are having a great time together. And in the book, they seem to be lower income family. But it's Christmas Eve, they're out having a great time. The mom and grandma are celebrating, and in a split second, his mom and grandmother get brutally attacked and murdered in front of his eyes. And it's so interesting reading YoonJ's experience because he sees the blood and hears all the screaming, but he doesn't know what's going on. And then after the fact, when the accident happens, people ask him what he felt, and all he says is, I feel nothing. It's not because he is a psychopath or a sociopath. It's just how he truly feels, and he's not someone that will filter himself. He is just honest, because that's how he felt. He felt nothing when he saw his mother and grandmother being brutally murdered and attacked. After YoonJ is left to live on his own, and the apartment he lives in is connected to a bookstore his mom and grandmother owns. And then one day, his neighbor Mr. Shim, who owns a bakery upstairs, starts talking to him, and Mr. Shim kind of alludes that his mom told him to take care of Yoonjin if anything ever happens to him. And Mr. Shim is kind of like this confidant, and he's an adult that cares for YoonJ, and he's also someone that Yoonjin trusts to have honest conversations about or has questions about things in society. So Mr. Shim is one of the core characters, and he is a really nice man that we see him there to support YoonJ. I mentioned earlier that his mom and grandmother were brutally attacked and murdered. His mom actually becomes severely hospitalized, and and this is important because Eugene goes to the hospital, and when he goes to the hospital every day to visit his mom, he notices a man looking at him every day. And then one day this man approaches him, and his name is Mr. Yoon, or Professor Yoon, and he tells YoonJ that he has a son called Gong that looks exactly like him, and he wants YoonJ to pretend to be his son. I won't spoil the details why, but the reason why their paths cross is because it ultimately leads to YoonJ and the son of Mr. Yoon, Gong, to meet and cross paths. Gon and YoonJ become not quite friends, but their paths definitely cross. Gon has actually been someone who had very tough childhood and upbringing and was just recently reunited for his parents. I don't want to get into details, I don't want to spoil, but basically Gon is kind of this badass, and he tries really hard to be tough, but then YoonJ kind of sees through him, and he sees that with Gon trying so hard to be tough, that he actually is very vulnerable and very weak, and all he seeks is to be understood by his parents, by society. So they're really a cool duality of characters, because even though they're two separate people, I feel like it's showing two sides of one person. And it made me think about how the author Sohn Won-Pyung talked about when she had her child and her baby, that she thought, like, as a parent, you can't really decide if your child's going to be good or bad. And as a parent, how do you decide to love them? You don't decide, but you do love them, right? But what do you do if your kid's like really evil? So I feel like Gon and YoonJ are two different sides of the same coin, and I really like how they kind of counteract and balance each other, and they have eventually become, I would say, like a friendship. The story sets around when YoonJ is kind of entering teenager or adolescent. So of course there is a romantic interest called Dora, and she's there because without spoiling the book too much again, because I think it's definitely worth reading, is Dora kind of introduces or evokes certain feelings or physical feelings that lead to more internal feelings or emotions of what's like for romantic love or to have an attraction. So there's an interesting character that's introduced called Dora as well. And then one thing that wasn't really obvious, but I kind of thought about after the book ended, was I kind of just assumed Gong and Yoonhae were friends, but then I also thought that maybe there was a bit of like potential at one point of lovers, which would have been really interesting because it would have been like a enemies to lovers kind of plot line, but then Dora came along. So if you read this book, I'm really curious if you felt at any point there's a possible romance between Yoonhae and Gong. So those are all the characters, and so basically after, I guess getting back to the story, what this book is about really, is after Yoonhae's mom is in the hospital and his grandma is murdered, he kind of has to discover the world on his own without his mother like spoon-feeding him. And then of course he meets Mr. Shim, he meets Dr. Yoon, he meets Gong, and he meets Dora. And it's really cool because the story is kind of slice of life of the interior dialogue that Yoonhae goes through, and also how he learns to navigate society and how he ultimately maybe feels emotions and finally understands what it means to care for someone. So I just really like this book too, because Yoonhae also, even though he has this disorder, he tries to question why that person murdered his grandma and hurt his mom and also 4 other strangers. And he also has a lot of empathy, because instead of being an emotional reaction to it, be like, I hate that guy, he killed all these people, he starts questioning what leads someone to fulfilling these actions to hurt someone else. So I thought this book was really great to have all that commentary, because in our world today we have mass shooters, we have people who are murderers, we have serial killers, and I'm not trying to justify these people's behaviors in society, but it's fun to think about, we like to think that people aren't born evil and something made them this way. So I thought the book did a really good job touching on all these points of someone's upbringing. Common themes throughout the book that I kind of just touched on now about the idea of how no one is born evil, and like all these things that happen in our life condition or lead someone to be in a certain way. So the first common theme I found is that, and I'll quote the book, is there's no such person who can't be saved. There are only people who have been given up on trying to save others. So I thought that's really interesting because this kind of puts the blame on not the murderer, but blames all the people in their life that gave up on them. And that just makes me really sad to think about people who have been ostracized, and over time they know they're not a bad person probably, but they just feel that people have given up on them and they don't know how else to act but act out and have an impact. And like obviously like a well-adjusted person will know that's not the way to get attention or approval, but they don't know what else to do. So I thought that's a very great theme that was throughout the whole book, and the book did a really good job at giving me a lot of empathy for people out there like that. Another common theme is probably no surprise is the idea of human connection, of being human, and also wanting the importance of being connected to someone, even if it's one person. Like I think all of us, when it comes to the end of our life, we just hope that someone is there to witness it, no matter if it's for a season or for our whole lives, we find a life partner, because we aren't even for people who are considered loners or identify as lone wolves, I think everyone wants to have someone in their life, even if it's just sporadically, just to be able to share your experiences with. The other common theme I notice is the idea of, because the characters in this book are quite young, they're teenagers, it kind of touches on how children long to be loved, and it's so important to give a child a great space to grow up in, to be nurtured in, so they feel love. And the beauty of a child is that not only do they long to be loved, but they have unlimited love to give, because unlike adults like me and you watching this video that have been jaded by society or over time experienced trauma to put our walls up, children have the ability to, they're a fresh slate, so they don't put their walls up yet unless something hurts them. So I really like that idea of that children have so much love to give, and also they have so much love to receive, and we have to be so careful as adults that we have the power to really set a child on their life path on how they see themselves and their self-worth. And another topic, which probably isn't a surprise because this book is about human connection and understanding, is the idea of love. So in this book, it talks about platonic love, it talks about romantic love, and it also talks about familial love, and how all these different types of love have a place in our life, and how they're all so important and affect us differently. And again, if you read this book, I would love to hear your thoughts about if you thought if there was a romance between Gong and YoonJ, because it's not clear to me, but I'm curious if you feel it was alluded to by any chance. I gave this book a 5 out of 5, so there weren't too many things I didn't like. The only feedback I would have for it, but this is a personal preference, is, and this is probably why I don't read horror, is it was a little gory and a little graphic. You'll see why if you read this book. There is a bit of animal abuse and a bit of maybe, I guess, physical or fun abuse. So just a heads up if you read this book that it exists. Reasons why I like this book. The first one is, if you like a book about books, this book is for you. As mentioned earlier, YoonJ's family owns a bookstore, and when he is left to live by himself, he kind of reads books and he kind of talks about books. And one quote I want to share is, the world of movies, soap operas, or cartoons were already so meticulous there are no blanks left to fill. Books have a lot of blanks to fill. So I really like the idea of this, because YoonJ talks about how with his mind, when he watches movies and TV shows, is that everything's there for you. The story, the plot, the dialogue, and it's all there in front of you to see. Whereas in the book, you're reading it, but you're still imagining the world, the characters, how things are told, like body language, and that's the beauty of books. So this book made me appreciate the world of books a lot more. Another reason I really enjoy this book, and I kind of talked a lot about in the common themes, is it makes me think a lot about our society nowadays and how extremists or terrorists or mass murderers or shooters come about to be. And obviously for people I think they're doing terrible things, and in like a bad way, I feel it's almost too late to help them because they have decided to I guess execute their idea. But this book really challenges my opinion and my viewpoint of maybe a society who has failed them, and that if we go back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that maybe there was something that triggered them, and like maybe the first thing failed and they could have been saved, or maybe 10 things have failed and they could have been saved. But the issue is that everyone in their lives had given up on them, or society has, and they were almost pushed to act so extreme. So this book really made me think about that and really challenged me on having these opinions about people that exist out there. The other reason I want to share this book is because it is a quick, short read, but it is very powerful and impactful. And it kind of reminds you of short stories where you can say so much with so little, and I just love books like this. On Goodreads, this book got an average of 4.2 out of 5. This book has been out for 2 years, and I believe it's very accurate. I do want to say, if you're a K-pop BTS fan, that this book was, I guess, supported, or it was recommended by 3 BTS members. So a lot of the reviews on Goodreads were a lot of obviously BTS ARMY fans, and I do think the BTS ARMY is very strong, and I do think if some people read this book separately, probably wouldn't have liked it as much, without knowing that, or not as much if a BTS member didn't recommend it. So 4.2, I personally agree with it, but just take that with a grain of salt, knowing the BTS factor. I do want to disclaimer though, I'm a huge BTS fan, but I didn't know that going in when reading this book. So I'll start as always with reasons why people didn't like this book. The reasons why I didn't like it was they thought it was too cutesy, especially at the ending. It wrapped up a bit too nicely. They also thought that there was lots of trigger warnings that were unexpected. I kind of mentioned them earlier. There's lots of violence, a lot of gore, and there's also animal abuse, which can be very hard for people to read, which I understand. And the final reason that people didn't like it was they felt like there were too many coincidental moments that kind of like lay into each other, which I can agree with, but I think that's what just happens when you have a short book with a big plot and narrative. Reasons why people on Goodreads love it, in addition to all the reasons why I like it, some reasons why it was, even though this book was translated from Korean to English, the message was still very powerful and didn't feel lost in translation. People also thought the commentary on what it means to be human and society was also very great, and some people felt it started off really well and ended well as well. So I feel like there's kind of extremes on both sides. You either love this book or you thought it was okay. Reasons why I think you should read this book. So you should read it if you were a fan of the curious incident of a dog in nighttime, and if you're also a fan of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I've actually done a review for both these books, so I'll link them down below if you're interested. And also, I think it's a great book if you're kind of curious to see how others perceive the world. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because one of my favorite things to ask people about a book is how it made them feel. Because if you ask me in a week, a month, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly the plot or the characters of the book, but I'll always remember how it made me feel. So this book, Almond by Sohn Won-Pyung, it made me feel very empathetic towards others, and it makes me really think about, I've always been in practice of, if someone does something I don't like, I don't think about how they're doing something against me. I'm thinking about how they're doing something for themselves, because they're thinking for themselves. And maybe a byproduct is that it's hurting me, but I really like to believe that's not people's true intention. So this book really just pushed me a bit farther in that belief towards people who do, I would say, objectively evil things, and just trying to understand why people are the way they are. So this book was great for that. Thank you for watching until the end of my full book review for Almond by Sohn Won-Pyung. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear reviews down below. And guess what? My next book is, I think it's been my next book for like maybe 4 or 5 videos now. It is a non-fiction book. It's not that it's not good, it's just that it's very dense. And I will definitely review this book next time, because I am finally only 40 pages left. So this will be my next book review if you guys want to join me. Bye!